Um, so at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker. And I know many of you know Dr. Mary Stockwell. She has been very kind to us in the past in being willing to do presentations for us. And we spoke with her at the anniversary program, and she made the mistake of saying to me, if you would like to have a presentation on the Treaty of Greenville, just let me know. Well, you can't say that to me and not expect me to come back, Mary, and say, of course, we want you to do a presentation for us on the Treaty of Greenville. And it's this year, 225th anniversary of the treaty. And let me just give a little background. I know many of you know Mary, but Mary she received her Bachelor of Arts in History from Marymount College, her Master of Arts and her PhD in History from University of Toledo. She is a retired history professor from Lourdes University. She has many, many publications, and I really can't mention them all because I know we want to get started with the presentation, but I specifically want to mention the book, The Other Trail of Tears, The Removal of the Ohio Indians, and also Unlikely General, Anthony Wayne and the Battle for America, because those both touch upon the impact of this Battle of Fallen Timbers. And her most recent book is Interrupted Odyssey, Ulysses S. Grant and the American Indians. So keep an eye out for those publications. She has multiple essays, articles, and other books also available. So let me just welcome Dr. Stockwell one more time and go ahead and take it away, Mary.
Oh, Julia, thank you for inviting me. I didn't know you were setting a trap. You all seem like such nice, wonderful people. But if I can help you in any way, again, thank you for asking me. I always say historians, we rely on archives, yes, and we rely on old books, but we rely on people who keep history alive in places like Fallen Timbers. And all of you, I wish I could be in person and tell you, you have no idea how wonderful you are in the work you're doing and how special it is. You're also extremely cutting edge in everything that I've seen and everything you're doing. So thanks for inviting me. And, you know, when Julia wrote to me, she goes, now you're speaking about the Treaty of Greenville. Like, what's your title? It didn't take me long to come up with it. Wayne's Greatest Victory. Because in Wayne's eyes, the victory that he achieved in the Treaty of Greenville surpassed what he had achieved the year before in battle. I can move it along. I hope you can see it as it moves along. Are you seeing the slides move?
I'm not, Mary. I don't know.
Okay.
I do not see it either.
Brian, can you move the slides?
No, I can. You should be able, if you click at the bottom and hit the share screen, make sure you pick the right slideshow.
Let me see. Sorry. Can you guys see this?
There we go.
Okay. Do everybody see it? Now do you see it move?
Yes.
All right.
Hey.
You see Wayne and his horse? I'm sorry, I have been to many Zoom meetings. This is my first Zoom presentation. So I hope you're seeing Anthony Wayne near his horse. Today we remember him as a great, great general. And if you study his life, you know that he became a better and better general. He was excellent by the end of the American Revolution. The man who comes west to fight the Indians, if Washington needs him to fight the Indians, is really at his best. Much more cautious, much more deliberate in how he fights, deeply concerned about his men, and believe it or not, even deeply concerned about the tribes he must fight. We remember him as a general, but we forget that he also was a diplomat, and he played a role as a diplomat that's significant. When George Washington appointed him as commander of this new thing called the Legion of the United States in 1792, he was given very specific orders on what he was to do. He was given a specific military task. But again, we often forget he was given a very specific diplomatic task. And these two tasks came together. How can we understand them? We have to understand everything Wayne did in light of Washington's Indian policy. Anthony Wayne was not a lone wolf. He followed the directions that came to him through Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, and those came directly from George Washington. And George Washington's Indian policy is what sets the tone for what will happen at Fallen Timbers and what will happen at the Treaty of Greenville. Washington's attitude was this: as we move west, and we must move west as a nation, we must cross the Ohio River. I must get my American people out there to settle, to have farms, to have towns, to have economic opportunity, and then to have political opportunity in this huge new republic that we're building. If we don't do that, if we don't go west, we will die in the vine. We'll be those brown states there to the east, on the eastern seaboard, but we'll never grow as a nation. Well, how do you move west? You move west by recognizing the fact that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of Indian tribes living all the way out to the Mississippi River. You simply can't say, get out of the way. Washington's idea is we'll recognize their title to the land. They have some ownership in this. I'll send people out to write treaties with them, and slowly we will buy much of the land from them, and we'll pay them every year in annuities. We'll set up a fur trade. We'll become allies. They'll turn away from Great Britain and war. Somehow, some way, it might take 50 years, but we'll become one great big nation where we will all be a part of it. At least that was his ideal. And as the Indians began to surrender their land, there'd be sale of it to the Americans. People would settle on it, and all these states would enter the Union. That's his dream. And his idea when he becomes president is diplomacy first. I can work this out. We can work this out peacefully. If we go to war, it's only as a last resort. Washington respected the Indians as tremendous warriors. It's an opinion that Wayne shared, and he respected them as great diplomats, that they understood when they came to a treaty negotiation, they all knew what they were fighting for. All right. So again, I'm trying to get to Wayne's 2 assignments as he sent west. 3 treaties had already been written between the United States and the tribes across the Ohio, even before George Washington became president. These treaties were signed. One was signed at Fort McIntosh, and that's over on the where the Beaver River runs into the Ohio in Pennsylvania. Another one was signed at Fort Finney a year later, and that is right about west of Cincinnati on the Ohio River. Another one at Fort Harmar along the Muskingum. You can see the tribes who signed these treaties: the Wyandot, Delaware, Ottawa, Chippewa, the Shawnee, and also the Iroquois, all of the tribes except for the Mohawk. They had signed an earlier treaty. And in these treaties, the US government, even before Washington was president, had said, we need to cross the Mississippi, the Ohio River. May we settle in what is now Southern Ohio? And all the tribes said yes. The treaties were signed, and by the time George Washington was president, the treaties were ignored. And the tribes across the Ohio River had decided, no, we're going to keep the Ohio River as the boundary between us. This will be the Indian boundary. And you cross into Ohio, and we have a right to attack your settlers and do anything we please. By the time Washington's president, about 1,000 American settlers had been killed or kidnapped as they tried to settle across the Ohio River in Southern Ohio. And the Americans and Washington is saying, but you signed these treaties allowing it. And the Indians are saying, no, the treaties, no, we're going to ignore them. We're going to keep the Ohio River as a boundary. I have this map for you. Maybe you can understand better what the fight is all about. Because, again, we're getting closer to what's Anthony Wayne actually coming out here to fight for, both in a military way if he has to, but also diplomatically. Here's the treaty line that was determined by all the treaties, both at McIntosh, at Fort Finney, and also at Fort Harmar. Imagine a line being drawn from where Cleveland is right now, coming down the Cuyahoga River south to Fort Lawrence. Fort Lawrence, another historic site that you can visit. This was a fort that was set up by the United States in the American Revolution. Now imagine that line coming across almost the natural divide of Ohio. The rivers to the north run into Lake Erie. The rivers to the south run into the Ohio River. At a place called Pickawillany, which is first a French trading post, the line would come down the Great and Little Miami rivers, about Fort Washington, where Cincinnati is. That's the boundary. Americans can settle to the south. Indian nations would live towards the north. They could go back and forth. They could trade. They could certainly hunt in both directions, but they couldn't settle in either direction. There's some problems with this. The British are in Detroit. They refused to give up this fort even after the American Revolution. And the Indians are gathering, many of them, around the person of Little Turtle, the great Miami chief, and his village at Kikiyanga. This is what had been agreed to. And George Washington has to make a decision. Am I going to continue with these treaties? Am I going to get my people across that Ohio River? He has sent 2 armies west, and both have been pretty much decimated when he decides to send Anthony Wayne west. You know the story, what happens when Anthony Wayne gets this commission to raise the Legion of the United States. What he's basically doing is defending that treaty line. George Washington tells him, I'm sending you west. You must raise an army. You must train that army perfectly. You must hold it in reserve. If I need you to fight the Indians and maybe the British, you must fight and you must win. That's his military task if called upon. But he is given a second equal task, and that is, you've got to be my diplomat. You've got to negotiate. When it's all over, you must get all these tribes back to the negotiating table. They must agree to that line, and then hopefully, the fighting will stop, and in some way, shape, or form, we'll live in peace. For 2 years, from 1792 to 1794, Anthony Wayne comes west, building his army first at Pittsburgh, then he moves out to Legionville on the Ohio River. He eventually is ordered to Fort Washington, and finally, he heads north to Fort Greenville that he builds. Again, with George Washington and Henry Knox always telling him, remember, you have 2 things to accomplish. Whether you fight or not, the goal is to get the Indians to agree to that line. It's diplomacy that counts more than anything. Now, again, Wayne is aware of all this. He knows what he's supposed to do. George Washington, in this 2-year period behind the scenes, is negotiating with all the tribes across the Ohio River. And he's telling them over and over again, you sign these treaties, we're moving west, we're going to figure out a way to live side by side. Don't fight us, don't join the British, take our annuities, trade with us, we'll figure out a way to live together. It's difficult for people today, knowing how huge the United States is going to become and how swiftly it's going to be settled, to look at the world the way Washington and Wayne did. They did not expect the settlement of the West to go as quickly as it did. Again, they thought of having decades and decades of peace where somehow, once the fighting was over, we would live together. We see it more tragically. They saw it more hopefully. I always talk about the Pennsylvania Historical Society. I just wanted to show you a picture of it where all Anthony Wayne's papers are held. He carried all his papers in a huge leather trunk. And in that trunk, he carried the Treaty of Fort McIntosh, the Treaty of Fort Harmar, the Treaty of Fort Finney. He carried them with him, and he studied them for 2 years to try to understand, what's the ground game I'm fighting for? What's the diplomacy I'm fighting for? What's the treaty I'm fighting for? And again, you can go to the Pennsylvania Historical Society, read 65 volumes of his papers, but I can tell you the day I found those treaties in his papers, I understood him better. Again, this is not a madman coming west. He's a man who must build an army, fight if he has to. He hopes he doesn't have to. Washington hopes he doesn't have to. But battle or not, they've committed themselves to this treaty. What does Wayne really think about it? Wayne is a great letter writer. He confesses what he thinks openly to Washington, to Knox. He has friends that he writes to in Philadelphia. He talks to his men. He's trying to rebuild his relationship with his son Isaac, and he pours his heart out. What does he think of this double task that he's been given? He agrees with George Washington overall. He truly loves him. They bonded at Valley Forge, and that bond stayed strong up through Yorktown. As Wayne is moving west, various times along the way, he will send out speeches to the tribes. This is you get a person who can speak the language, either Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot, whatever, give them a speech to read, give them a white flag, send them out into Indian country and tell them, we don't want to fight. We want you to live up to these treaties. Please come in, please negotiate. We don't have to fight. Don't listen to the British. Let's build a future together, not against each other. So he's hopeful, cautiously hopeful, doesn't want to doubt Washington's optimistic vision, but he has an experience that he writes about that's really chilling. When he was in Legionville, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, this was the winter camp for his army. He tries to talk to the Seneca, who are members of the great Iroquois Confederation, the Haudenosaunee, and he tries to be kind, tries to again encourage them, make peace with us. Seneca chief at one point comes and stands right next to the Ohio River, and he tells Wayne to look at the river. Look at that river. He goes, that's the boundary between you and us. You're not coming across the Appalachians. You're not in any way, shape, or form moving into our country or sharing this country or defeating us. It belongs to us. Washington knew, Knox knew, but also Wayne knew that the British in Detroit, the British in Canada were encouraging the Indians to fight for that border, fight for the Ohio River. It will help us, Great Britain, because Canada can move all the way south. Canada can take in the entire Midwest. So it's a tense time. It's a difficult time. And Wayne certainly was no madman saying, I've got to get this country. He understood the stakes on all sides, and he understood his two tasks. All of you know the story of what happened because you've kept alive the battlefield. After 2 years of Washington negotiating in the background, the negotiations fall apart. Washington was so desperate not to fight. He never told Wayne that he actually offered all the tribes across the Ohio River as a boundary. He said, take it, take the Ohio River. We'll figure something else out. They said, no, we're going to fight you. They had defeated two armies. They thought they could take Wayne. And in the summer of 1794, Anthony Wayne, who has built his army, worried about his army, trained them fanatically, is still not certain they can win and is facing deep depression and illness himself. He's told, start marching. And Washington and Knox tell him, don't go to Kikiyunga. Don't go over to the Miami villages. They're deserted. Head to the illegal British fort just built at Fort Miami's. Head for it. And they said, somewhere along this line, the Indians will meet you. They will be waiting for you. The British will probably be with them. Even if you make it up to Fort Miami's, go ahead, attack the fort. But you have to get a victory for us. And Wayne begins his march all the way up from Fort Greenville, and he heads north. I have to tell you, all the while, as he's going from Greenville to Fort Recovery, he's building forts along the way. He builds Fort Defiance. Even as he begins heading up the Maumee towards Fort Miami's, he keeps sending runners out, saying, we don't have to fight. We don't have to do this. Don't listen to the British. He often bets his second in command, Wilkinson. He tells James Wilkinson many times, I will bet you so many guineas. I will bet you so much wine that they come in and they make peace and we get the treaty and we don't have to fight. And it doesn't happen. On the morning of August the 20th, 1794, when Anthony Wayne's army is very, very close to Fort Miami's, close to that British fort, the Indians open fire. This is, again, a coalition of tribes from the Great Lakes They are fighting with Canadian militia. At this point, I must make a confession. I've told Julia about it. I don't know how this will help in the legislature, but we as the Stockwells have just discovered that our great grandfather, going back 7 greats, was fighting at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. He was fighting with the Indians. He was a Canadian militiaman, and he was on the far Indian right against Wayne, against Harrison, against everyone. And we've tracked him down. I am ashamed to say his name is John Stockwell, and he's a loyalist. And he, oh Lord, we think he left New York or New England, and he came out to Upper Canada. He came to Detroit, and he fought with the Shawnee at Blue Licks during the American Revolution. And from this, the Stockwells got land in Ontario. So I don't know how this will help in the legislature, but my ancestors are all over the place on this one. But it's been quite a surprise to know who he was. They lose the battle. The Indians lose the battle, and they flee up to Fort Miami's. Now, Wayne has done his military duty, and that was, you were given this task to, if we have to send you to show the Indians we mean what we say, we want, you've got to open up Ohio for settlement. That's part of it. He's done it. But the more significant thing he has to do is get a treaty. So he goes up to Fort Miami's, he comes back to Defiance, he builds Fort Wayne, he goes back to Greenville. It's now the late fall of 1794, early winter of 1795. He almost loses his mind with worry. Where is everybody? Why don't the Shawnee come in? Why doesn't everybody come in? Where are the Wyandots? Where are the Miami? Where are all these chiefs that I defeated? And he begins to say, I don't think I won. He calls it the Battle of the Rapids. And he starts to write to his friends and even to Knox, I think we won, but maybe we didn't. Maybe it was just a skirmish, and maybe they're talking to the British, and maybe we're going to have to do this again. And he says, I cannot do it again. I cannot raise another army. I can't go through what I did to put this army together. He knew he was sick. He knew he probably didn't have the strength to do it again. He also didn't know if the United States had the wherewithal to fight another battle. To him, the Battle of the Rapids was miraculous. Fallen Timbers was miraculous that they had won because the Indians were such good fighters. What does he do? He starts sending out speeches. He sends out speeches. These are some of the best letters I've ever read. Listen to the voice of truth and peace. And he says, don't fight. Please come in and settle this. Accept this treaty line. We've got food. We got goods. We got annuities. You guys trade with us. Ally with us in this country. My God, turn your back on the British. He was like so many Americans who had fought in the American Revolution. They hated the British. He despises the British, like Jackson will despise the British, and William Henry Harrison will hate them because they're the enemy. Come and join with us. Now, as he tells everybody in all his forts, if you see anybody coming and under a white flag of truce, send them to me at Greenville so we can finish this. The diplomatic task will be done. He said, I will give food, give anything anybody needs. He gets messages from a fellow by the name of Hamtramck, he's left in charge, Captain Hamtramck of Fort Wayne. And he loves Wayne, and he says, keeps writing him letters. He goes, oh, we're seeing the Indians. They don't want a treaty. They just want to meet you. They want to see you. As Wayne was coming north towards what would be the Battle of Fallen Timbers, all along the Appalachian chain, the Indians called him Lightning. Who is this guy? When he was done, they called him the Wind. They said, we do just want to meet the Wind. This is very difficult for, I think, modern Americans to understand. We see everything so black and white and good and evil. For many of the Native Americans, for the men especially who fought in battle, if you could defeat them, and if you could defeat them honorably, you were a hero to them. And this is beginning to happen among the Native Americans are beginning to say, this man bested us in a fair fight. There's something interesting there. That gives Wayne a little hope, but he's perplexed. Don't worry about me. Come and sign that treaty. Finally, he has told his, again, men at Greenville, you see anybody on a horse, you see anybody with a white flag, don't you dare shoot. You bring them to me. These are the Indians coming to complete this process of the settlement of Ohio. He finally, it's a snowy night, here he comes. It's Blue Jacket, the great chief of the Shawnee, who has organized the Confederation that fought him at Fallen Timbers. He is the top leader. He comes into the Fort Greenville, and he brings in prisoners who had been taken by the Indians, American prisoners. He comes in, he says, he gives a beautiful speech. Our hearts and minds are changed. We now consider ourselves your friends and brothers. He says, we have been delayed because we've been talking to the British since we lost. And the British at Detroit have been telling us, Wayne can't fight again. Wayne is weak. America's weak. Just go ahead and try him in the spring, try him in the summer. Most of his soldiers are going to have to leave because they have, their time is up. It wasn't a critical battle. You don't give up after the Battle of the Rapids. Keep fighting. And Blue Jacket said, enough's enough. It can't go on. He said, there's been enough suffering. I will take a chance with the United States of America. And before he leaves, he promises, Wayne, we'll be back in the summer. We'll be back in the summer and we'll sign the treaty. And he says something interesting that almost breaks Wayne's heart. He goes, when we sign the treaty and all the seals are on it, may I have a copy? May I be the one who's given the copy? And Wayne says, yes, of course. He loads up all food and goods and supplies on Blue Jacket's horses, and off they go. And then Wayne says, this is the victory. This is it. If we can get a treaty, hopefully the fighting will end forever. He begins to get ready. He knows they're coming in the summer. You can go to Greenville, Ohio right now, and you can see this building. This is a replica of the building Wayne built. He was determined to show respect for the Indians. He didn't want them to come into Fort Greenville and have guns pointed at them. The Indians always complained, yeah, maybe we signed treaties before, but you brought us into your forts and you surrounded us with soldiers and you looked like you were going to shoot us if we didn't sign. He didn't want to do that. He tried to build a council house that looked like a Shawnee council house or a Wyandotte council house. He set it up so that it would be on the east-west axis, the way a Native American council house would be. And he sits and he waits, and they begin to wait in June on into July 1755. He only allows his most trustworthy officers to be with him. Awful James Wilkinson is banished to Fort Washington, but he sits at his side. His young lieutenant, William Henry Harrison, is with him. His artillery officer is with him. A handful of officers are with him. This is a reconstruction of what it looked like on the interior. And the goal was that Wayne and his men would sit and wait in their perfect uniforms with their white hair and their shining boots, wait for the men they considered their equals to come and talk with them. He would light the council fire and say, we're going to wait. And again, Harrison waited at his side. They finally come in. First, older chiefs start to trickle in as summer is beginning. Men who might not even have fought at Fallen Timbers, men as upwards of 100 years old come from the Potawatomi and the Ottawa and the Chippewa especially, and they just talk to Wayne, and they're happy that the wars are over. Finally, the big three come. First, Blue Jacket comes, Buckingham of the Delaware comes, Tari the Crane of the Wyandotte. These are the three men who put together the Confederation to stop Anthony Wayne. They had failed, and they had to make the decision, do we keep fighting with the British as our allies, or do we surrender? Do we come in and make a deal? And they're the three who eventually come in. Wayne is waiting for Little Turtle. Wayne never quite understands that Blue Jacket is the leader. He still thinks that Little Turtle is the great leader because he had studied how had St. Clair been defeated the year before Wayne gets his appointment, and he had learned that it was this genius chief, Little Turtle of the Miami, who had figured out how to stalk St. Clair. He had figured out a communication line with all his warriors all the way up the Maumee River Valley, and he had figured out how to feed his men. Wayne just thought he was an absolute genius. He thought this is the man. And once Little Turtle arrived, coming in last with all his men and all his people, he said, now we can really truly begin the negotiation. Now, I've said Wayne respected the Indians, so he respects them as diplomats and warriors, but he would not let them stay in the fort. The top chiefs could come, they could negotiate, but their people had to stay outside the walls, remembering Pontiac's rebellion. And he said, maybe the war isn't over yet. And he also told his men, his gunners, you keep the guns of the Greenville pointed at the warriors and everybody out there outside of the walls of the fort. We're hoping for the best, but I will not be surprised the worst can happen. I love this painting. I know I love Julia talking about the beautiful painting from the bank about the Battle of Fallen Timbers. This is a famous painting of the battle of the treaty negotiations at Greenville. It's a gigantic painting. It's in our Ohio state capitol, and it bears no resemblance to what actually happened according to the records that were kept. I don't care. It's still utterly beautiful. You can see Anthony Wayne standing tall on the right. That's what he would have looked like when he was 31 years old and he joined Washington's army at the start of the American Revolution. He was sick, old before his time, a worn out man. He looked like he did in the portrait up in the corner. You can see Harrison to the side there. That's what Harrison looked like in the War of 1812. William Henry Harrison was only 22 years old. At his side, he was again, one of his aides. But if you look to the left, see the Native American man with the feathers in his hair holding out the wampum toward Wayne? That's Little Turtle. You can go to his left and you can kind of see two Indians commiserating. One's in a blue jacket. That's Blue Jacket and Tarhi the Crane. Now, when I look at this painting, and I used to look at it for years growing up, I looked at it and I said to myself, well, there's Wayne, young, healthy, must have been just a lark coming out here to Fallen Timbers. And there's Little Turtle. What a wonderful man. They're wanting to keep the peace, and those mean Indians behind him don't want to keep the peace. It's the exact opposite of what was actually happening. Again, Wayne was tired, exhausted, bloated. He had suffered all kinds of illnesses. He struggled with depression, but he was determined to complete the second of the two assignments that Washington gave him. And he opens up the council finally in the summer of 1795. Again, imagine them all sitting together in this tiny room, the top chiefs that he has defeated, and Wayne with his top officers, including the young Harrison. And Wayne tries very hard to speak at first, not kind of the poetic, beautiful way Native Americans speak. And he said, the war is over. I'm going to pick up the hatchet and I'm going to throw it into Lake Erie. It's over. This is a time for peace. Now, remember I said he has those treaties. He carries those treaties with him. He brings up Fort McIntosh. He brings up Fort Harmar. He brings up Fort Finney. And he says, there's a line that you drew across what is now the modern state of Ohio. You're on one side, we're on the other. He said, that's all I'm asking for. He said, I know that I crossed that line to defeat you at the rapids, but that land, basically most of it still remains for you. We want to settle south of it. He lets the British have it. Do not believe the British. Don't you remember they egged you on? And then when the battle was over, they closed the gates of Fort Miami's in your face. They are not trustworthy. And he told him something else, that actually Alexander Hamilton had been writing to him. And Hamilton had told him, George Washington had secured Jay's treaty. He had sent John Jay over to England, and the British had agreed to finally give up all their forts in the Western country. They would leave Detroit. They were going to leave Fort Miami's. They would leave Mackinac. They would leave Oswego. They would leave Niagara. They would head back into Canada. And this support that they had been getting since the ending of the French and Indian War, he said, it's over. The American Revolution in the West is finally over. Come to your senses. Take Washington's offer. Take the annuities. Trade with us. Live in peace with us. It was a very good speech. Wayne had learned how to negotiate, really pretty much just on his own, studying who the Native Americans were, how they carried on discussions in a setting like this. He had tried to negotiate with the Creek Indians at the end of the American Revolution, and I can only say he made a complete fool of himself, talking to them as children of the forest. And he would say, children of the forest, you stay back there. We're fighting, this is a white man's war. Stay out of it with us and the British. Absolutely foolish. He had grown up and he had matured, and he said, I realized I'm talking to my equals, both on the battlefield and in diplomacy. So he spoke to them with immense respect. Again, that's not saying he doesn't want certain things. He wants this country to be open for the Americans. I should say, you can read all of this in the American state papers. The United States government has kept a perfect record of every negotiation with the American Indians. It's perfect. And it's all available online. You can read it at any time. And maybe, down the road, listening to these tremendous things you're planning with all these websites, and there are so many links to the actual documents and to the actual accounts of what was happening at Greenville. People could actually read them. Blue Jacket stands up first. Again, he's the leader. He put together those warriors at Fallen Timbers. He stands up and he says, no more war. It's over. He repeats what he has said to Anthony Wayne. No more listening to the British. It's over. We are now aligned with you. And this is important because they need to get guns. They need to get supplies. They need to get manufactured goods. So a chief has to decide, who's my ally? Who will help me the most? He's come to the conclusion it's the United States. He does something very dramatic and he says, I am no longer a war chief. And he goes and he sits down along the edge of that council house and he says, I'm a village chief. I'm a peace chief. I don't even get to talk anymore about war. War is over. Very powerful. The great Delaware chief, Buckahalis, eventually speaks. He is bitter. He agrees, we're going to sign the treaty, we give up, but it's more, you beat us. We can't fight anymore. We can't fight someone like Wayne again. The war is over. But he's bitter, he's cynical, and he just wonders. Wayne is promising all this today, but he says, what will the future bring? What trauma lies ahead for us? But I accept what's happening. Everyone agrees. All the chiefs agree. Everybody who's there, they all speak, and Blue Jacket and Buckahalis have been so powerful. It looks like Wayne, after a few days really of talking, is on the brink of getting a treaty that will confirm that treaty line. And then Little Turtle stands up. And Wayne is in trouble. Wayne is stunned because Little Turtle doesn't want any part of this treaty. Wayne admires him. Wayne thinks he's going to be the great peacemaker. He'll bring everyone kind of together. Maybe he'll be the icing on the cake. And Little Turtle stands up and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what Fort McIntosh. I've never been there. What's Fort Harmer? What's Fort Finney? I never signed a treaty. Miami never signed any treaties. We don't know what you're talking about. He completely throws the negotiations overboard, and suddenly he sways the council house. Not the Little Turtle. Not Blue Jacket. Not Buckahalis. But the Potawatomis began to stand up and say, hey, we don't remember signing anything. Ottawa chiefs, we don't remember signing anything. We don't know what you're talking about, Wayne. The negotiations break down right in front of Anthony Wayne, and he did not know what to do. And when you read the summation and the records of the American state papers, I'm like, Wayne, think of something if you want to save yourself. All he can do is keep repeating the same argument over and over again. He restates his opening kind of monologue about what he wants to achieve. It looks like the negotiations are about to break down. It looks like there will be no treaty. It looks like everybody's going back to their villages and the war will start up again in the fall. And then the great chief Tarhi the Crane of the Wyandot stands up. Tarhi rescues Anthony Wayne. Tarhi looks up. I hear a phone. Tarhi stands up. He had been at fallen at the battle. He had smashed his arm. His arm would never be useful again. He saw almost all of his fellow chiefs dead on the battlefield. And he stands up. He has had it. And he says to Little Turtle, I was there. I was at Fort McIntosh. We agreed to that treaty line. The Wyandot signed the treaties. He says, I can point to people in this room who were at some of these treaties, and we signed those documents, and we made promises to the United States. And he ends by saying, yes, the British put a hatchet in our hands. Yes, they egged us on, but we broke the treaties, and we buried that hatchet in the hands of the Americans, and no more war. It ends. He silences everyone. The Wyandots are the most respected of all the Ohio tribes. They have suffered the most from the Iroquois. They had fled to Ohio, and they had opened up Ohio to all their other brother tribes, and they're called the grandfathers. And they hold the wampum, they hold all the treaties that are signed. And he said, no more, that's it. He completely rescues Anthony Wayne. It's Tarhi the Crane to the rescue. And there's something again about Native American leaders. Once they decide the wars are over, that's it. They will never change their mind. Tarhi will become one of the greatest defenders of the US. He's going to fight in the War of 1812 on the side of the United States. It works. Calm is restored. And Anthony Wayne now lays out exactly what he wants in the treaty. He's been talking to Knox. He's been talking to Washington. He says, I think we got to move the treaty line and we got to get a few more pieces of territory north of it. And he lays this out to the Indians. Take a look at this map. You'll see where the original Fort McIntosh treaty line was. He moves it slightly north because he wants to get Fort Recovery in. Fort Recovery is the fort he built over the site of St. Clair's massacre. He says, I can't give that up. So he said, let's take the line up to Fort Recovery, and then let's come down to the Kentucky River. This gives the Americans access to the Ohio along the Kentucky River. He also says, I have fought for some ground up along that Maumee River. We need to make sure that there are 6 mile by 12 mile square blocks that are under the authority of the United States government. And he picks many of them. Many of you, if you live in Toledo, Harrisburg or Maumee, you're in a 12 mile square block that Wayne blocked out around Fort Miami's. I've lived in it most of my life. And he was again a surveyor, and he spotted places where down the road, as things changed, America would strategically need these sites. And that's the Treaty of Greenville. And he lays it out for everyone. Once it's written, and once he's got the treaty line and he shows them what other pieces of territory he's going to get, he has this treaty read to everybody's language. So it's read in Shawnee to the Shawnee, word for word. It's read in Wyandot. It's read in Ottawa. It's read in Chippewa. It's read in every language, in the Miami language. And when it's read, he says, do you understand what you're signing? Do you agree to what you're signing? They say yes. And the treaty is signed. I have always found that if you, again, show people the actual treaty where you see the names of the great chiefs and their totems, I don't know. There's something heartbreaking about this. That yes, yes, we want peace. And yes, I'm here because the United States of America was victorious and we have our lives this way. But these men are giving up, and they're giving up really a way of life. And it's a huge shift in an alliance from the British to the Americans, who they say we're going to have to trust that they will protect us. When the treaty is signed, Wayne again loads food and goods on all the horses, and he gives as much as he can away. But again, he is ordered from the US government. And he tells the Indians two things. He goes, now look, the surveyors are going to start coming in along the southern part of what is now Ohio. They're going to start carving out these 6 mile by 6 mile square blocks. Go watch them. Make sure they're honest. He invites them. I found heartbreaking records to me. I wish they had gone in maybe to see it. The surveyors kept great records. Every time they would begin a new survey, they would wait for the chiefs. No one ever came. They stayed on the other side of the treaty line. He also told them, be vigilant. Don't let anybody come on your land and settle it. If there's any trouble in your country, you come back to me at Fort Greenville. I come back to the US government. We have sworn to protect you. I just got two more things to say about this. I always love to tell the story about when he gets the Treaty of Greenville, he thinks this is his great accomplishment, that it will really bring peace. Finally, in February 1796, he goes, I got to go back to Philadelphia for a variety of reasons. And when he gets to the edge of the city, all the bells in the city are ringing. And it's like, what's going on? I'm here for a party. And soldiers come out and meet him from Philadelphia, and they go, the bells are ringing for you. You won the Battle of Fallen Timbers. He goes, what? No, I won the Battle of the Rapids. I got the Treaty of Greenville. I don't know what Fallen Timbers is. And he said he was a beautiful writer, and he had written in a letter to Knox that they fought in this battle in fallen timber, that he thought a tornado had broken down. That letter was published in the Philadelphia newspapers, and there's something about that poetic term, fallen timber. The battle's been known that ever since. George Washington gives them one more assignment, and he says, again, you did the military, you did the diplomatic. I need you again for diplomacy. Jay's treaty is approved. You must go back out to the Ohio country. You're still the commander. You've got to oversee the surrender of all those British forts. And Wayne doesn't. Again, in conclusion, it would surprise everybody. Maybe it would surprise the legislature. Person in the legislature you were describing. As Wayne comes north from Greenville and he gets on a boat in Lake Erie, goes up to Detroit, everywhere he went, thousands of Indians were waiting to greet him. They considered him a hero because he had defeated them honorably. And in their opinion, he had also done an honorable negotiation, respecting them at Greenville. He writes these beautiful eyewitness descriptions where he writes back to the government, and he says, I saw a blue jacket in the crowd, and I saw a little turtle in the crowd, and they're all now friends. He said, I get off the boat, everybody's shooting off guns and shouting for me. Wayne had never gotten much adulation in his life, and he gets it from the Indians. The records he kept of all the food he provided and all the goods he provided are important because he believed the French had been the allies of the Indians and had helped them. The British had helped them. And he thought, the Americans now, we must be the gift givers. We have to win these people to us by being kind and being generous. When I wrote the book On the Other Trail of Tears, and I had to see all the roles of all the people leaving in the 1830s and 1840s, I was astounded at how many children among the Wyandot, the Ottawa, and the Shawnee were named Anthony Wayne. I don't know what would have happened if Wayne had lived. If he had lived and been on the frontier and perhaps been able to keep the peace more fairly, history might have been different. And here's my ending, the place where I always end, the beautiful statue at Fallen Timbers. He, again, if I believe if we could speak to Wayne now and we asked him, what was the greatest thing you ever achieved in your military career? He would have said, like all generals who come to hate war in the end, he would have said, oh, the greatest thing I won was the Treaty of Greenville. I fulfilled the duty, I had fulfilled what Washington had given me. I helped to move my nation west. And he gives his nation, without his ever knowing it, 10 years of peace. He dies on his way back from Detroit on December 15th, 1796. He has no idea that he's given 10 years of peace, 10 remarkable years when Ohio will enter the Union. All the Western territories will open, even the Louisiana territory will be purchased and opened. Our Indian policy will remain very similar all the way up and through the War of 1812. Washington's vision, Knox's vision, Wayne's vision was somehow, it wouldn't go so fast that we couldn't figure out a way to all live side by side in peace, helping each other. It doesn't happen. 10 years down the road, it's that young chief on the left, Tecumseh, who fought with Blue Jacket and who refused to come to the Greenville Treaty negotiations. He will put together a bigger confederation to try to stop the US one last time. He will win British support for it, and that will help lead to the War of 1812 in the Western country. The man who stops him and finally secures Ohio and all points west for the US is the young fellow who sat, I'd like to imagine him stiff-backed and anxious, waiting at the side of Anthony Wayne at the Greenville Council House, and that's William Henry Harrison. That's another story. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'd like to open the floor if anyone has any questions for Mary, talking a little bit. We spend so much of our time in the commission talking about the battle itself. And I find this talk very interesting because it shows us what the battle led to. And I just would like to invite anyone, if you would like to ask any questions of Mary.
You could even ask me about my scandalous ancestor.
I know you told me about him when we got together for the anniversary program, and I mentioned to you that we believe that one of my husband's relatives was one of the first militia from the Kentucky militia who died in the battle. Yes. So we may have, our families may have been on opposite sides.
Might not be speaking very soon.
Correct.
And I have to tell you one story I tell about my father. My father was another John Stockwell, and he was prouder of his Irish than his English heritage. So he would always take us to Fort Meigs, where we could see where Harrison defeated the British. We would stand there and look across the river to that Presbyterian church where the British set up their guns. He was just so happy that Harrison had defeated the British. He's gone now. He never knew that our ancestor, another John Stockwell, was across the river, probably at that church, helping to bombard Harrison. But maybe that's the amazing thing about American history. Eventually, we have to all come together, and it's interesting. Now, the farther we get away from it, Little Turtle and Wayne, both of these men, and Blue Jacket and Harrison, these are all our ancestors. We're a big, amazing, troubled, wonderful family that hopefully we get better and better and treat each other better and better into the future. I have not lost my optimism, even as I age. I think that's a good sign.
Mary, it's Mike Sheehy, and
Hi, Mike.
Hi, and it was just a brilliant presentation, and I can't tell you how much I appreciated and learned.
Thank you.
And it's funny, we have similar backgrounds. My dad used to take a half a dozen of us kids upriver from East Toledo, and we would stop,
Yes.
at Perrysburg, but then we would, cross the river and go all the way maybe to Waterville, but stop either at a historical monument
Yes.
And sometimes even at a cemetery, and find, and in so doing, it brought the history of the region alive to us.
Oh, it did. Go ahead.
All these years later, and of course, my mother was German. My father is like your dad had that proud Irish ancestry and the understanding of the building of the railroads and the
Yes.
canal systems. And so
You're bringing back memories.
yeah, but the thing is, I think so many people in the United States say, well, do you know about the Alamo? And they say, well, yeah, well, we know about the Alamo, but in American history, this battle is so much more
Oh,
important and is so much
it's
more telling for the expansion of our great nation than I'm not trying to minimize the Alamo, but the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and as you talk about the brilliant diplomacy that he that Wayne possessed. I didn't understand that, but yeah, this is great stuff, and I appreciate your making the presentation to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I tell you, I was just interviewed by a young fellow about Anthony Wayne. And I said, well, how did you find me? And he goes, well, I'm doing local history, and you're kind of interesting local history. And I remember I said, this is national history. This is the history of our nation. This was a critical battle to move us west. How do you think we got here? I sometimes think this battle and then the War of 1812 is forgotten because we go immediately into that horrible Civil War. And the Civil War was so terrible and so bloody and so critical, it almost like washes away the memory of how difficult it was to get across the Appalachians, how difficult it was to get out to the Mississippi River. Now we look back, it looks so inevitable. It wasn't inevitable. On any day, in any way, shape, or form, it could have changed and been different. And you remind me of, again, the Irish in my family came from East Toledo. I got to tell you one more story. Our dad would do the same thing. We'd go up and down the river. He moved from East Toledo. Little did he know he was living in Anthony Wayne's 12-mile square block. He would take us to Sidecut Park. Oh boy, we got to go play at Sidecut Park, have a picnic. And it was always, oh my God, he's marching us towards the canals. We knew we had to go. My two sisters and my baby brother and my mother, who's of Czech and Polish descent. She goes, I just have learned to live with the Irish. And he would take us over to those, to the limestone blocks. And he would say, you look at those blocks. You look at those blocks. Your ancestors were paid a penny a day to put those blocks in. And they did it to give you your freedom and to make sure you could practice your faith and get your education and all that. I swear to God, all those stories, I never stopped learning about America until I got that PhD and had to stop. And it was the trips of this East Toledo Irishman and his love of history, and my mother's love too. So when you were talking about the Boy Scouts, my heart's just jumping up and down. How wonderful what you will be able to do to open up people's hearts. And I've had people on the road tell me, they've said, and some of them are members of the Wyandotte Nation. I've talked to Miami, Nation and everything. And they said there's a weird healing that historians have to do. We tell everybody's story and we show the conflict and how the people tried and hopefully how we get better. I don't think historians, and I don't think all of you at Volunteers, I don't think you realize there's a healing that will take place. And Americans will see great sadness and we've hurt each other, but we've gone forward to better and better things. And my hope is in tomorrow and the future. And that's why we love history and we study it. So we feel empathy for the past, compassion for everybody in the present, and go forward to a better and hopefully a kinder future.
Well,
Mary, this is Gary Noonan. Could you maybe explain the process by which the Indians were removed from the lands that were guaranteed to them by the Treaty of Greenville?
This is, one thing I don't know how to say this, but I often say this. I used to tell my students this: if every time you study a treaty, if you substitute the word truce for treaty, you understand the process better. I think both sides knew this would not be the end. This was a truce after a terrible war, 3 armies sent west. Again, hundreds and hundreds of American settlers killed, and trauma for all the native tribes. Ohio fills up very fast. We enter the Union in 1803. And as we enter the Union and we take Detroit, it becomes part of the Michigan territory. Treaties are written, more treaties are written. Jefferson especially sends people west, and they begin slowly buying pieces of that trans Greenville Treaty line. Again, the chiefs agree. And often chiefs who are exhausted, they say, that's fine if we get more annuities and we still have a place to live, we'll stay here. Harrison out west, his job is keep the peace with the Indians, do not fight. But when he's governor of Indiana, he's told, you get that land. This kind of quickly moving across that Greenville Treaty line, quickly buying everything, is going to motivate Tecumseh to stand up and say, enough is enough. You're breaking your treaties, you're breaking them too quickly. This is our land. He'll put a confederation together that eventually again leads to the War of 1812 out on the western frontier. That war is another war nobody pays any attention to. Talk about the Alamo. The War of 1812 is considered a naval war. No, it was a huge war in the West where Tecumseh and the British fight to make sure the entire Midwest, forget the Greenville Treaty line, Ohio, all points west, becomes an Indian state permanently under the control and protection of Canada. It is a disaster for the Indians. They lose everything. And it's actually President Monroe who has to figure out what to do about all these defeated tribes. Madison and Monroe will have to figure it out. President Monroe comes up with a plan. Again, this is the heart of my book, The Other Trail of Tears, and this stunned me. Monroe is the first president who says, we keep doing these treaties and we keep pushing them back, pushing them back, pushing them back. He says, why don't we guarantee them actual reserves all throughout northern Ohio and the West? And he gives it to them. It all works out. It looks like they're going to be able to stay on these reserves. And then we get Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson says, I don't forgive him for Tecumseh. I don't forgive him for fighting. I want him out of this side of the Mississippi River, and Indian removal begins. And it's a tragic story, but Jackson has a long memory, and he never forgives Tecumseh for that War of 1812. But so I know I talked a lot, but it's a huge story that continues on in the future.
Mary, this is Adolph. There was a question that came in through the chat. I don't know if you saw it, but it was Ruth Board asked the question if there's any markers today that dictate or show where the line was defined by the Treaty of Greenville.
The Greenville Treaty line, yes.
Is there a road or a trail that you can traverse to be able to connect to that?
I would suggest make sure, if you ever visit Fort Lawrence has, that's where it began on the eastern edge. There are Ohio state, historical markers all the way across that line. This fascinated people up to the 1920s. And many people had driving tours that you could follow across Ohio, come back down, come down the Cuyahoga, follow it all the way west, and then come down coming down the valley of the Great Miami River. Americans since the 1930s and 40s have not been interested in going back and discovering that. But I think that would be another tremendous thing to set up the Greenville Treaty line, where it was. Things like that. It's waiting to be discovered, and I think this is something else. The hardest thing to get, I think, is how fluid everything was. Every generation would try. Maybe this is it. Maybe we'll get peace, and then boom, you've got so many people so desperate for life, for land, and a future. I'm ashamed to say, like my Irish ancestors, all the treaties are just truces for the time being, and so we fight another day. But yeah, but that would be wonderful. If it would get modernized now, those signs, and maybe we'd get a national or a state park just on the Treaty of Greenville line.
Mary, hi, this is Frank Betwin.
Hi, Frank.
I did send you,
General Washington.
yeah,
I'm sorry, General Wayne.
I sent you an email
Okay.
during your presentation of the marker just outside of Fort Recovery, which
Excellent.
is on that line.
Yes.
It was put there in the 1990s, so you have that.
Good. Good. Thanks for helping me realize I'm completely out of date.
The question is,
Wonderful.
character William Wells, who was with
Oh,
Turtle and the Indians, then with Wayne, and very significant in all this, was he at the treaty? Wells.
he was, but Wayne did not exactly trust him. Wayne didn't trust him, and he didn't. Later, William Henry Harrison won't particularly trust him, and I don't know why.
Well, I thank you, Mary, very much. This is certainly something, again, it puts another whole layer onto the story of the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and no historic event happens in a vacuum. So it's really important for us to continue to learn all of the different complexities of this time period. And so I thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I would just like to conclude our program tonight.